Hey guys, welcome back. In this lesson, we're going to go over the subtractive technique. It's the last one on our list of different methods to composite our render elements. I will also be demonstrating how this can be used to obtain any missing passes from our render elements without having to go back to CG. Let's get started and switch to this slide and talk about the subtractive technique from V-Ray. So far, we've been using add or multiply for our advanced additive, and even for light selects. For subtractive, we're going to be using the total opposite. We're going to be using either subtract or divide. We will be taking our RGBA, our beauty image, and subtracting the lighting, the GI, reflection, and all the other passes. Let's switch to After Effects and let's actually show you how this works. Let's take the alpha, let's duplicate it and call it RGBA since we're going to be using this quite a lot in this lesson. Let's make a comp. Let's close this one. Let's call this DT robot subtractive and build comp. Let's go to a frame that we're familiar with, like this one. And let's take, for example, the lighting pass and set it to subtract. Subtract will be located all the way almost at the bottom of our blending modes list. If we set it to subtract, we will see that we're actually removing any lighting information from this render, and we'll be getting some sort of weird colorization and artifacting from this, and that is because we're at 16-bit. We're going to need even more accurate results by switching to 32-bit float. Now that colorization is gone. So if we take, for example, now the subsurface, subtract it, the subsurface is gone. And this could be used for all the other passes like specular, reflection, refraction, and whatnot. I want to talk about when do I use this technique, this subtractive technique. The subtractive technique is mostly used when the render that comes out of CG, it's very, very close to either the concept art that the client sent or the design frame that we did in-house. When the render is really, really close and I look at it and I notice that the amount of comp that I have to do is very little, I will be using a subtract technique. I will be taking the lighting, removing it, and maybe adding it again and doing some curves, adjustments, and whatnot. Let's show you that. So let's say that the client was really happy with this image. Their only note was to make the reflections a little bit warmer. So what I would do is I would take the reflection, set it to subtract, and add it again on top. But in this case, I would be adding a hue and saturation and making the reflections a little bit warmer. Actually, let's make it really, really warm so it's very easy to notice. Okay, here we go. And now you have your warm reflections. If the client has another node and they want to make the subsurface, all these pink elements, a different color, so let's add it. So let's put the subsurface back on top again and set it to subtract. Put it back on top again and set it to add. And let's do any tweaks. And there you go. So it's you will be able to see that our comp is way more simple than our advanced additive or even our light selects. And that is because the changes that we have to make are very little compared to the previous lessons. The other situation in which I use a subtractive technique is when I am missing passes from CG. Let's say, for example, you were missing your GI pass. How do you get that back in comp without having to go back to rendering? So let's name these missing passes. You have your beauty here. Like I said, you're missing your GI pass. How do you get that? You will add all of your other passes, lighting, reflect, refract, specular, self-illumination, and subsurface. Set them all to add, pre-compose them, and set them to subtract, and set them to subtract. Now, what you are getting here is actually the GI pass that you're missing. And to fix all these edge problems, let's do our ampere multiplication on each one of these passes. Now that should be fixed. So you're getting the GI pass that you're missing. Let's say now that you're missing, instead of your GI, you're missing your subsurface pass. How do you get that back? Let's add the GI here. Let's ampere multiply it. Let's ampere multiply GI and turn off the subsurface. And now all you're getting is your subsurface. With that in mind, let's take it a step further and let's use the divide blending mode. Let's say you have your GI pass. Let's call this raw GI. You have your GI pass, but you want to actually use your raw GI, but the raw GI was not rendered. And the reason why you want to use your raw GI is because you don't want to actually affect any of the diffuse information, any of these colors here. You just want to tweak the raw contribution of the global illumination. If you remember, in the advanced additive technique, you get your GI but by multiplying your raw GI by your diffuse. In this case, since we're missing the raw GI, we're going to be using the GI and the diffuse. And we'll be taking our diffuse and dividing it. The divide will be all the way down here, right below subtract. By setting that to divide, you're actually getting your raw GI. Now, it's very important to mention that the order here is going to matter, because if you were to set your GI to divide, you will be getting something completely different. So it's very different than your add or your multiply, because the order is going to matter a lot here. So you set your diffuse to divide and you get your raw GI. Then you can take this and use it in your actual build comp to tweak your raw GI. The same could be said for, let's say, your reflection and your reflect. Let's say you want to get your reflection filter, which kind of looked like a Fresnel pass, if you remember. So if we take our raw reflection, actually our reflection, and set it to divide, will be, no, my mistake. If we take our raw reflection and set that to divide, we'll be getting actually our reflection filter, which looked like a Fresnel. So let's call this reflection filter. So by utilizing all these different techniques, you can get the passes that you're missing. So this was a look at how to utilize our subtractive technique to obtain passes that you're missing and even composite our image with a less. So this was a look at how and when to utilize the subtractive technique to either obtain passes that you're missing or create a really simplified version of your build comp. In the next lesson, we're going to be talking about which method we're going to be using. In the next lesson, we're going to be talking about which method I like to use the most, and we'll be taking that method and applying it to a robot and really tweaking that to make it look amazing. See you guys in the next lesson.